Hello and welcome. It's a brand new month and I have a whole new program prepared for your learning and coloring pleasure. Today, I'll show you my technique on coloring crystals. First, as always, announcements. I have only one today, but it's a big one. The mid-November steampunk coloring freakout. If you haven't heard about this yet, check out this video link. It will be a blast of a live stream and giveaway, brought to you by the very popular channel Color with Sammy. I'm honored to have been selected as one of the featured artists, along with some very talented adult coloring creators like Kristen Karen, Monha Gates, Sarah Richter, Jennifer Zimmerman, and a few others. So that's happening on November 8th and 9th. It's a 2-day event, but of course it will remain as a recording for anyone to watch and meet the artist no matter when in the future you're watching this. Super excited about this. Thank you so much for making this happen, Sammy. Now on to crystals. Crystals are fascinating and, surprisingly, everywhere. Most minerals occur naturally as crystals. Growing crystals at home is also becoming a more popular hobby all over the world. It's certainly mesmerizing to actually witness atoms lock themselves in geometrically sound patterns and shapes. And while some crystals grow by one atomic layer per year or even slower, others grow visibly within just a day or even a few hours. They are, of course, extremely beautiful and make very interesting art subjects. So today I'm coloring a crystal cluster that I drew just for this occasion. I want this cluster to be blue quartz, so I will color it in blue and turquoise tones. To prepare for this coloring, I did some research on the subject. I looked at a lot of crystal photography and read up on crystal shapes and their growing patterns. Having a very basic visual understanding of crystals, I can now begin my coloring. I bet you thought I was going to start with white charcoal. That is usually my preferred way of coloring, but today I want to do something different. I will start with my darker blue tone and add the white highlights and reflections at the very end. I happen to be working on lightly toned tan paper, but that's mainly because I really like the texture of this particular paper. For this effect, it doesn't really matter if you color on white or gray or tan or blue or even black. If you are doing this on very dark paper though, I would recommend that you fill in the crystals entirely with white. You can use charcoal or acrylic paint as a primer, and then continue with the step that I'm doing now. That way your colors will be clean and highly saturated, and you won't lose any pigment to the darkness of the paper. Working on either white or lightly toned paper, you don't need to worry about this. You can just go straight to the main colors, as I'm doing right now. By the way, if you're new to this channel, I always put all the links to all the materials that I've used during the episode in the video description, so check that out after the show. I like to work in layers, and I like to color systematically. I actually pre-select all my pencils that I plan to use on each drawing, or coloring. Now, that isn't to say that the selection is 100% binding, but what I do want to avoid is having the entire 150 Prismacolor pencil set right in front of me, tempting me with every single imaginable tone of every single color. Okay, it's a bit extreme, but it's pretty tempting to have all those colors next to you when you're trying to work. Having 8 to 12 colors pre-selected on something like this is totally reasonable, and it will help you stay organized in your coloring process. I also like to apply the chosen color all over where I think it belongs before switching to the next color. This allows for consistency and an even distribution of various levels of saturation. For instance, having applied dark blue to the darkest parts of my crystals, I can now see just how much of the composition is dark and just how much of the space I have to fill with the brighter turquoise tone. And to answer your question, which I know you're already thinking, of how do I know where to apply the darkest colors on something as insane looking as a crystal cluster? I consult reference photos. For most other subject matters, I would go into a very detailed light and shadow theory explaining why certain areas are darker than others, but none of that theory actually applies to crystals. Some of these areas are darker because they're thinner, some are darker because they're in shadow, and some are darker just because that's the actual pigment concentration in that part of the crystal. There's a huge element of randomness here. The color is not uniformed all over the crystal formation. All these crystalline structures appear more or less turquoise in color, but in reality some parts would be a lot more pale, while others would have dark blue or purple or even brown in them. So consider that when coloring crystals. No two formations in the universe are identical or even close enough to compare. Whatever crystal you are drawing or coloring is specific to your vision of what it should look like. There isn't actually anything measurable to compare your coloring to. No one can look at your color choices and say, oh, that would never happen, because guess what? It would, and it does. Crystals come in all shapes and sizes and colors. literally. The important thing in coloring crystals is to clearly define every face or every flat surface of the crystal with vibrant and high contrast gradients. As I'm coloring each little window or the channeling of the formations, I either have a strong gradient, if it's a larger flat surface, or I color it in one solid but strong color, if it's a smaller surface. For instance, in these parts, the entire length of the crystal is best colored in a gradient with seemingly random variation, while the little windows look better in solid white. The ones that I plan to have in solid white, I will just leave uncolored or lightly colored, and I'll fill them in later on with a gel pen. I'm now applying my third color, building up that turquoise effect that I imagined. So I went from deep blue to vibrant sky blue, now onto jade green, all to create the turquoise effect. But why not just pick the perfect turquoise color from the pencil box, you may ask? Two reasons. One, you may not have the perfect turquoise color in your pencil box. And two, building up a single color with multiple colors gives the subject a more three-dimensional feel, and also creates really cool effects later on when you start enhancing your gradients with lighter tones. If you use a single shade of blue or turquoise on something like this, it may come out looking flat, and you won't get that crystalline sparkle effect. Crystals tend to be translucent and sometimes even transparent, but they're solid, not hollow. You want to capture that solid matter that also traps light. The way to do that is by using multiple colors in layers and gradients. And for the part that really makes those crystals look like they're capturing light, I'm using a 10% cool gray. Not white. That's right, I'm actually staying away from solid white on this one, until the very end. The cool gray applied over my other colors acts as a wonderful blender, while also establishing those beautiful high contrast edges. I apply this effect all over, pretty evenly, always consulting my reference photos. The ultimate best thing would have been to have a real crystal lying around for reference, but I don't have any, so photography is the next best thing. Having applied lighter highlights, I switch back to my first three colors and go over the whole thing again, building up my contrast and saturation. Why is this important? It's all about balance. Crystals are an odd subject, so I'm judging which areas should be darker and which should be lighter as I go. I want these to be vibrant, but I also want my main blue effect to come out as this aquamarine blue. Very light, very airy. For this base aggregation of tiny just forming crystals, I have a slightly different strategy. This part of the cluster is like crystal candy, a nebulous formation of shapeless little shards. So I treat it as a single object rather than focusing on every single element individually. I add bigger, broader shadows using circular motions with my pencil to suggest that the surface is textured. And I'm also introducing purple now. I want the base aggregation to have a slightly different feel to it than the well-formed crystals sticking out of it. For my final color, I use light lavender for small highlights here and there. And now I'm on to my main effect, pure white. For the white effect, I chose to use a gel pen. Acrylic paint will work just as well. A gel pen is interesting. It can be a little tricky, so it's a good idea to practice on scrap paper before you apply anything to your coloring. Just like whiteout, gel pen lines take a few seconds to dry. It's like wet paint at first, so you'll have a few seconds to play with it. I like to use a Q-tip to smudge the freshly applied white, but only if I'm working on sloppier brush stroke effects. If I want a thinner, cleaner line, I would use a pencil or a toothpick. By itself, the gel pen makes very thick and very solid lines, which is certainly a good effect for certain occasions, but not here. Here, I don't want clean, thick lines, but I would rather have bursts of light. So I use both the Q-tip and the pencil trick to achieve my highlights. And I add little white dots all over the base of the crystal candy bit. It's like stars on the night sky. It makes for a really nice glitter effect. That looks really good to me. Want to give it a shot too? I put this drawing as a practice gift page for you in the YouTube Pages album in my Facebook group Talent. If you're a member already, you already know where to get all these pages. If you're not a member, join the group, go to Photos, then Albums, scroll, find YouTube Pages, and there's a bunch of free images in there for you to choose from. They're all from the previous episodes that featured gift pages. Each page is clearly titled and has a link to the corresponding video in the description. I'd love to see your crystal colorings. And of course, if you actually grow or collect crystals, I'd love to see the photos and hear your thoughts and stories about this awesome hobby. I'm Lisa Mitrokhin. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, please like this video, subscribe to my channel, and don't forget about the awesome steampunk livestream event that's coming up this weekend on Color with Sammy. I'll see you there. Bye. Bye!